so much for being here to discuss such an important and timely topic on behalf of Mississippi's children and families. So welcome today, three of colleagues and individuals around Mississippi. So we have Dr. John Green, professor at University of Mississippi and a senior associate for the Center for Population Studies. Dr. Corey Wiggins, executive director of the Mississippi NAACP on many boards and leadership, and he's also an advisory board member for Mississippi Kids Count. And Senator Giles Ward, retired from Mississippi State Senate, but certainly continues to serve and is chair of the Mississippi's Census Complete Count. So welcome, everyone. We hear a lot about the importance of the census, whether it's via social media, billboards we see, public service announcement, etc. And also for the 2020 Kids Count data book, we highlighted the census this year. And one of the quotes from that data book was Dr. Darren Webb, who's recently retired as state economist for the state of Mississippi. He stated that kids are the most undercounted group in the census. They're also the target group for many federal funds flowing into the state. And so getting that number right is essential. Not only are federal funds tied to the county, but an accurate count is necessary for understanding the current socioeconomic conditions. He further stated, if we don't know where we are, we can't get to where we want to be. And so with the Children's Foundation of Mississippi now being home to Mississippi Kids Count, we really believe that for Mississippi to reach its potential, we must make sure that our state's children reach theirs. So we also believe that a strong start in childhood establishes a sturdy foundation for lifelong learning and contributions to our communities. We know in a state of approximately 3 million citizens, approximately 700,000 are children 0 through 18 years. So one of the ways that the Children's Foundation is elevating and informing important issues impacting children are through our online series, Chats About Children. So Senator Ward, let's begin today's chat with you. Among your many roles in public service, you also, as we said earlier, are chair of the Complete Count Committee in Mississippi. Please tell us a little bit more about the committee.
I'll be glad to, and thank you for this opportunity to continue to promote probably one of the most important, if not the most important, efforts going on in our state during calendar year 2020. I was appointed by Governor Bryant last year, during the last year of his term, to serve as chairman of Mississippi's Complete Count Committee. In addition to my role as chairman, I was delighted to have Dr. John Green from the University of Mississippi to join in as vice chairman. You mentioned him in the introductory remarks, and then we had Emily Kruger, an outstanding attorney who was on the staff of Governor Bryant and has continued to serve as a policy advisor to Governor Reeves to serve as the secretary. Then we had probably another 8 or so appointees that we made across the state in various important roles, military, religious, governmental affairs, to try and get the message of the importance of this endeavor out to all of our people. The census actually is taken by the United States Bureau of Census, or the Bureau of Census, or Census Bureau, I'll get it right in just a moment, which is a subgroup of the Department of Commerce. But the states took responsibility for promoting it. We don't count anyone. That is the federal government responsibility. But it is so important for us to educate and get an apathetic society. I don't know any other way to say it, but we see it happen when it comes to elections. And we once again have seen it happen in census, that it's something I'll do tomorrow. I'll wait, I'll do this, and then it just keeps on going. So our role has been to try and educate everyone on the importance of it.
Thank you for those insights and for setting the stage for the chat this afternoon, Senator Ward. And so, Dr. Wiggins, I know you also have a real pulse on the needs of Mississippians across the state from your previous work at the Hope Institute and now as director of Mississippi NAACP. What does Mississippi gain in having a complete count? Senator Ward alluded to the importance of this. What are some more specific things that Mississippi stands to gain as a result of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and again, Linda, thank you for providing for the opportunity to share with you all this afternoon. I mean, I think the gains are across a number of whether it's state or federal programs. The gains of opportunity exist even when you're talking about sort of economic development. The data that's collected by the census really forms the baseline or fabric of how most decisions are made, whether you're talking about workforce development, economic policy, and state and federal policy, local municipal policy, because these decisions are made that are data informed, understanding how many people living in a community, understanding what needs may exist in a community. And I think that's why making sure that we have people and ensuring that people are accounted in a census is particularly important. I would even say that it is really important when you think about those communities in Mississippi that are traditionally and historically underserved, communities of color, rural communities across the state. When you talk about how do you get economic development into the Mississippi Delta region or Southwest Mississippi, how do you make the case? Well, you make that case using census data. When you talk about the need for how do we support children, particularly children living in poverty across the state. When you start to look at, federal and state benefits programs, the census data is the basis of how those decisions are made. And you want to make sure that everyone is counted in that process to ensure that every community is getting their fair share of the resources that are being made available, and that policy leaders and policymakers have the necessary data to ensure that when they're making decisions, they can do it in a way that's informed, based upon where people are living, the conditions that people are experiencing in their community, and census data forms that baseline.
Thank you, Dr. Wiggins. Very informative, very important. So, Dr. Green, I know that you wrote the foreword to the Mississippi Kids Count Census Edition. Let's talk about the legalities of it. Is it required by law? And then also, what does Mississippi lose by not having a complete count? Dr. Wiggins mentioned some things, but if you'd follow up on those couple of points, that'd be great.
Sure, and thank you, like everyone else says, for having this opportunity to join this chat. So the question about is it actually required by law? The answer is yes. Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution mandates the census, and we've been doing a census ever since 1790. It's one of the bedrocks, actually, of our democracy. The ways in which people can actively participate in representative government includes voting and participation in the census. And that's because the apportionment for our representation in the states and federal government is based on these counts. But as already been discussed, these data are so widely used for other purposes. Obviously, when we talked about districting for political representation from the very local level to the state level, and then as I said, with federal government, and then also with the spending of dollars, the allocation of funding in terms of determining eligibility for different communities and different groups of people to receive support for these types of programs that's already been mentioned, as well as the allocation of those dollars. If you think about any agency in federal government, that they're all required in some way to use census data. The other thing that's important to realize is it's not just the decennial census data that we collect and that we're trying to have the greatest participation in 2020, but also that serves as the bedrock for other data products over the course of the next decade that are also required by law. Those include the official population estimates and also the American Community Survey. So they kind of data snapshot on all of the things that we're concerned about around quality of life and well-being in our communities, and especially as it relates to children, is informed by these data. And at the end of the process, that's what's required by law to be used in the making decisions about the allocation of those And what brings us together today to discuss what the implications are for children, it would be hard to overstate that. We've estimated through the Complete Count Committee, collaborating with our partners with the focus group, and also using data from the Census Bureau and other researchers, an estimate of about $5,000 in federal funds are allocated in Mississippi per year per person. And so the decisions that are made on that require the utilization of census data. Another example that I could give that really hits us close to our times right now is with the COVID-19 pandemic, that if you look at the CARES Act legislation, very specifically, you can go through there and I think it's over 20 times where population is mentioned. And the population is defined as the count that the Census Bureau provides. That is the official definition of what the population is. So as I said, it'd be hard to overstate what's at stake.
Not only in terms of economic benefits from what I've heard you each say, but just the quality of life for individuals across the state, no matter where they are, where are they coming from, etc. So I want to jump to Dr. Wiggins and to ask you, we know that children are the most at risk for being undercounted. So when we think about Dr. Wiggins, the impact on children's education and family, community, please speak to us about that.
Yeah, look, I want to pick up somewhere where Dr. Green left off, and he talked about right now and even this response to COVID and the CARES Act utilizing the census data as a point or construct and figure out how resources are allocated. I mean, if you think about, we have a number of children across the state who are in virtual learning. And when you think about having access to broadband, and if you can imagine, if you have communities who have not been counted or adequately counted, and you have service providers who are determining and making the decisions about where they have more access to broadband. And if you're a community, you hear stories about like, oh, I didn't know this community existed, right? Because it wasn't showing up on our census, or we didn't accurately count this community. But then you have the community has a need for broadband, and you can't utilize the census data going back, 10 years ago in making that case of why access and why that need exists. And that's just some examples that I sort of think about. And unfortunately, you see this happen, particularly in those communities where are high poverty communities, right? Where your communities where have a number of children who are living in high poverty communities. And I'm glad I'm here with some other data people, right? Because when you think about Mississippi, we have a more than half of our counties are considered to be persistent poverty counties, where the poverty rate for the past 3 census, the past 30 years, has been 20% or more. And so when you think about children and the needs of our children, where you're talking about access to healthy food, whether it's from a SNAP program or whether it is from having access to a grocery store, well, folks are using census data to make these decisions. And so if we care about and caring about our children and caring about children living in high poverty communities, then that even impresses upon us more the need to make sure that children are being counted, right? When you think about the needs and the support systems for so many children in Mississippi that rely upon CHIP programs, SNAP program, child care, like all these programs that support our children that connect back to census data, it's part of our civic duty. And I think that's the idea of equating responding to the census, our work to educate people about this census and encouraging people to be counted is part of our civic duty, is part of democracy that we got to lift up throughout the state.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wiggins. That's just very enlightening. And as we think about this earlier, and it's been a common thread about the economic well-being to children, and Dr. Wiggins, you touched on some of that with so many of the programs. Senator Ward, What about that? How does the census, in your opinion, have an economic benefit on children? Because we're not talking about just children as they are now. Another 10 years, our 2-year-olds will be 12, our 8-year-olds will be 18, et cetera. So help us understand that a little bit more, Senator Ward.
I think I can answer that question, and it'll take me less than 2 minutes, but just listen to the latest numbers that I have available to me are 2017 numbers. That's not that far off, but you can assume that they probably have increased a bit since these numbers. But this is federal dollars that came down to Mississippi specifically from census data and programs impacting children. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, $743 million. State Children's Health Insurance Program, $316 million. Head Start, $206 million. Title I grants to local education agencies, $199 million. National School Lunch Program, $173 million in 1 year. Special education grants, $123 million. Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, SNAP, $78 million. School breakfast programs, $64 million. Child and adult care food programs, $44 million. Child care and development block grants, $39 million. And child care mandatory and matching funds, $22 million. Those are just some I highlighted. I could have missed one or two, but we are talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars that are directly impacting our children. And, it's the parents' responsibility. Children are not going to, nor are they expected to fill out a census form. But parents so desperately need to care enough and understand the significance of this to go ahead and get that data in so that their children can be counted and be a part of the funding formulas that have been discussed thus far in this chat.
Senator Ward, thank you for those very, very sobering statistics. And as you said, in 1 year, as I understood, that amount of money. So when we think about, and you also talked about responsibility of parents, and we think about grandparents and aunts and uncles and others, it really seems to be a gift that we can give to our children and give to others as we're thinking about 10 minutes, 10 questions, right? That's pretty much what I understand that's about. So Dr. Green, what about the impact on children's health?
Yeah, as was mentioned in several of the types of programs that Senator Ward discussed, have an impact on children's health and well-being. And it's very clear as it relates to access to healthcare for children. If you think about through our hospitals, especially those in areas that are kind of critical high needs areas, critical access hospitals. If you think about access to primary care services, for example, with our community health centers, the role that they play in providing healthcare to children, and then also what it takes to lead a healthy life and kind of get that start, from programs like Head Start to within our schools, the types of nutrition assistance programs, the types of educational enhancement programs that are all informed by census data. And we've been talking about it as it relates to the allocation of dollars and that sort of thing. And one thing I want to point out is when we talk about the well-being of children, these data also impact the philanthropic community. Most of your foundations that are making investments in children's health and well-being are also utilizing these data. They're asking grantees, for example, to be able to comment on who they're serving, what the characteristics of their community are. They're using these other data products to be able to demonstrate need. And so, it's not just federal funding and it's not just local or state government funding, but also a lot of the other ways in which these types of programs that impact children are given resources. And also in terms of planning, if you think about the needs of, for example, schools and who they're serving, thinking about all these issues related to school districts and being able to make the estimates and then the projections for what's needed in the future, all of that is rooted in having good census counts as the starting place.
But I know we've been focusing on children, but let's say beyond children, and we're talking about within the communities. Are census dollars also connected to funding around something that everyone uses, like highways and bridges and infrastructure, that sort of thing? Is that something also, Senator Ward and Dr. Green, you could speak to?
It is indeed a lot more than simply nutrition programs, even though for the purpose of this discussion this afternoon, that's our primary focus. But indeed, dollars for your local community, roads, bridges, fire departments, fire trucks, so many things that impact our quality of life in a positive way, directly tied to the census. And it just cannot be overstated. It's impossible to overstate how important it is. And I want to go back to something that Dr. Green referred to earlier. It has been reliably computed and estimated that we're talking about for every person that we miss, $5,000 per person for a year, and considering the fact that the census data is used for 10 years, that's $50,000 impact. And if you take what I typically think of a family in Mississippi as being 4. There's probably many, many others with much larger than that, and there'll be some, but let's just say 4. That's $200,000 for 10 years that one family not responding to the census can actually cost their state, their community, their hometown, their neighborhood.
Yes, and I bring that up because we all know that children reside within their family structure, whatever that might be, but then they're all within a community, and the community obviously within a county and state. So all levels, even if folks are tuning in who beyond children wanted to make that point. So I know we're getting close to the end of the time here, but are there specific counties in the state that we need to focus on between now and the end of September to increase the complete count? Are we're really focusing on every county? Because I know at the end of this, there will be some information where people can go in and click on their county within the state. So Dr. Green, do you want to address that one?
Sure. So a few things that are important to look at. One is, as you mentioned, there's not a county in the state that has complete self-participation rates. So I think people in any community, in any city or county in the state can really help get out the message and help promote participation in the census. But there are places where the rates are much lower than others. And one of the great things with the 2020 census is that the Census Bureau has provided a website where we can go on and we can look at these self-participation rates by county and by city to be able to see what are those areas where we need to give a little extra push. The other thing that's important to emphasize is that in these remaining days of the 2020 census, that we're really pushing self-participation, being actively engaged, and you can respond via on the web or via telephone very easily. But that also the enumerators from the Census Bureau are out knocking on doors. And of course, the more people who self-participate, the fewer doors enumerators have to knock on. And that way they can really concentrate their time and attention on those places that are more likely to be undercounted. So in that respect, by self-responding, a person is helping others as well, because we're able to better utilize those resources. The great thing is that those numbers can be monitored on a daily basis, as well can the total participation rate. So we can see both through self-response and through the work that the enumerators are doing, how as a state we're progressing.
Thank you so much for that. And so, for anyone listening, to help assure that families and children across the state are counted, you just mentioned about doing this individually. But what about talking to your neighbors or folks that you interact with? What are some other suggestions that you've gleaned over the last year or so from the Complete Count Committee?
I would assert that for those who participate in any type of faith-based activity, and given the ministerial aspect of what we've been talking about the last 30 minutes, it is a totally appropriate sentence to state in a Sunday school class or during donut and coffee time at wherever you may be. Is have you responded to the census yet? We've got until September the 30th to respond. There is some discussion about whether or not that may be extended beyond, even beyond that. It was originally set to end on July, at the end of July, but it was extended a couple of months because of the serious consequences that Corona or COVID-19 has had on it. But there is still plenty of time. And all anyone has to do is simply sit down at a keyboard, if they have access to a computer, and type in Census 2020. And it will carry you to the link where you can respond online. 10 minutes, 10 questions, 10 years of impact. And this probably is a good time for me to say again, thank you, because I do have a conflict coming up, and I just looked at the watch and I'm going to have to get away from here. But I thank you. I thank your viewers. I thank the panel participants. Nothing has been any more important in the state of Mississippi this year than responding to the census. Please take it to heart and let's do our part.
Thank you, Senator Ward. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Dr. Green, and thank you, Dr. Wiggins. We so appreciate you making time for a chat about children. More information can be found at the Children's Foundation ms.org. Also, be looking for other information at the end of this broadcast. Thank you.